Hey, everybody, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. So, today we're really going to unpack this idea of selflessness in marriage. We've got this piece, it's called Selflessness in Marriage. Catchy, right?
To the point.
Totally. But honestly, I think it's something we can all kind of wrap our heads around, right? Like, who doesn't want a happier, more fulfilling relationship?
I think that's a universal desire for sure.
For sure. Okay, so getting into it, one of the first things that really stood out to me in this piece was this verse from Galatians. It says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." Which I feel like even outside of like a specifically religious context is pretty relevant, right?
Definitely.
So how do you see that, like that idea of reaping what you sow playing out in a marriage?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because it really does apply to so many different aspects of life, but especially marriage.
Yeah.
If we're constantly approaching our marriage with this this sense of what can I get out of it?
Right.
Or it's all about, me, that's exactly what we're going to get back.
Right. It's that whole...
You get what you give kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's not to say that we can't have our own needs and desires within a marriage, because of course we do. We're individuals. But if we're solely focused on ourselves, it's going to create this dynamic of imbalance and resentment.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think the text kind of touches on that as well. Like it calls out this me, myself, and I attitude as basically a relationship killer. But then it goes on to say, and this is what I found really interesting, it says that by focusing on your spouse's needs, you can actually find more personal happiness. So like, how does that work? 'Cause that feels a little counterintuitive at first, right?
Right.
It does, doesn't it? Because like you said, our initial instinct is, well, if I'm constantly putting myself second, how can that possibly lead to my own happiness?
Right. But here's the thing, and this is what's so fascinating about human psychology and relationships. There is actually a ton of research that shows when we are more outwardly focused, when we're more focused on giving, on serving, on prioritizing our partner's needs, it actually triggers a release of endorphins in our brains. So we literally feel happier.
Oh, wow. So it's like a chemical thing too.
Exactly. It's this amazing feedback loop. The more we give, the better we feel.
That's so cool. And, it made me think too about how the source material brings up Jesus as like the, I don't know, almost like the ultimate example of selflessness.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. Like talk about sacrifice. So do you think that level of selflessness, is that even attainable in, a real world marriage between two, imperfect people? That is the question, isn't it? And it's a high bar. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But I think what that example shows us is that it's about striving for that unwavering love and commitment to our partner's well-being. Because at the end of the day, love isn't just a feeling, is it?
Right.
It's an action.
Totally. It's what you do.
Exactly. So it's
Right.
about making those daily choices to put our spouse's needs first, even and perhaps especially when it's hard.
Which, let's be honest, is sometimes easier said than done.
For sure. For sure.
So, like, how does all of this actually play out in, the day-to-day of a marriage? Because the text mentions this idea of, like, selflessly submissive wives and husbands loving unconditionally.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, those are some pretty loaded terms.
They are.
So how do you see those concepts, like, functioning in a modern marriage?
Yeah, it's important to really unpack that language, isn't it? Because taken out of context, those terms can be very easily misunderstood, right? And I think it's really about, when we talk about submission, for example, it's not about one person being subservient to the other. It's about this mutual respect and understanding. It's about valuing our partner's opinions, even if we don't always agree with them.
So it's less about, like, one person always giving in and more about actually hearing each other out. Right?
Exactly. And that goes both ways.
Right.
It's not one-sided.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
And then with unconditional love, I mean, that's a big one, right?
Huge.
But that's really about, being there for our partner no matter what.
Through thick and thin.
Exactly. Through those challenges, through the arguments, through the tough times. Because let's be honest, no marriage is perfect, right?
Not even close.
So it's about being that unwavering source of support for our partner, even when they mess up, even when they're not at their best.
Which is a great point. And it kind of leads into something else that I really wanted to ask you about from this piece. It talks about treating your spouse the way you want to be treated, even if they're not necessarily doing the same for you right away.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is. So, I mean, how do we actually do that? Because it feels like, is that even realistic? Like, can we really give that much without feeling like we're being taken advantage of?
It's a great question, and it's definitely one of the biggest struggles, I think, in any relationship, not just marriage, because we're human, right?
Huh.
We have this innate desire for reciprocity. We want to know that what we're putting out there is being matched.
Yeah.
But I think the key here is to really shift our perspective. It's about understanding that true selflessness isn't transactional.
Yeah.
We're not keeping score.
It's not about that.
Exactly. It's about making a conscious choice to show up with love and understanding, even when we don't see immediate results.
Right. So it's about trusting that even if it's not happening right now, that selflessness will like ultimately make the relationship stronger.
Exactly. And it will,
Yeah.
because every act of kindness, every act of forgiveness, every time we choose to put our partner's needs before our own, it's like we're making a deposit into this emotional bank account of the relationship.
Ooh, I like that. I like that analogy.
And over time, those deposits, they add up. They create this incredible foundation of trust and intimacy that can really help us weather those inevitable storms that come up.
Absolutely. And we all know those storms are coming,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Okay, so now I do want to touch on one other thing from the text because it mentioned the importance of like personal space in a marriage, which I thought was interesting because, you're talking about selflessness, you're talking about being there for your partner, but then there's this idea of also needing your own time. So how do we like balance those two things? Because it feels like a constant juggling act sometimes.
It is. And it's something that every couple, I think, struggles with at some point or another. Because, again, we have these two needs, right? We have the need for connection, for intimacy, for togetherness.
For sure.
But we also have that need for individuality, for solitude, for pursuing our own passions.
Totally, totally.
And the key here is communication.
Yeah.
It's about being open and honest with our partner about what we need and creating a space where we both feel safe and comfortable expressing those needs.
So it goes back to that, like communication is key thing that we're always talking about.
Always. Because at the end of the day, when both partners feel heard, when they feel understood, and when they
Yeah.
feel like their needs are being met, that's when you create a truly, strong and fulfilling and lasting partnership. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does. So I guess to kind of bring this all together, it seems like from this text, like the big takeaway is that a successful marriage, a happy marriage, a fulfilling marriage really hinges on this idea of mutual selflessness.
Yeah.
It's about both partners showing up and not just, understanding their partner's needs, but actually like actively trying to meet them.
Yes. And that goes back to that very first point we talked about, right? Reaping what we sow. If we want to experience the joy and the fulfillment and the love that comes with a strong, healthy marriage, we have to be willing to put in the work.
Absolutely. We have to plant those seeds.
We do.
I love that. Such a good visual.
Mhm.
Okay, so as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with maybe a little bit of a thought-provoking question based on everything we've talked about today.
I like it.
So, do you think it's possible to be completely selfless in a marriage, or is there always going to be like some element of give and take? Something to ponder, right? As you continue to navigate this whole beautiful, messy world of marriage. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.